Yoda, bonjour, assalamu alaikum, talof alava, and welcome to this short presentation on neurodiversity, and with the intention to give you some things to consider and reflect on, because it's such a complex term and concept. And so it starts with a question: what is neurodiversity? Because it's been defined in different ways and people still understand in different way, and then we're thinking, but how do we apply that in practice? How do we use the terminologies? So here are a few things to consider. First, the simple fact that as humans, we do categorize, we do classify things, people. Let's stop just thinking about everything is diverse and we should accept everything the way it is. No, we can't help but do that. We've done it all through humanity, through hard sciences, biology with all the different species, chemistry with the elements, but also human sciences in anthropology, whether physical anthropology with more prehistory and the different size of the skeletons, or cultural anthropologies and all the different cultures, ethnicities, and also psychology, psychiatry. So it's always trying to classify. And in a way, I want to say there's nothing bad, deeply bad around classifying. It's more about what's the value that we put in each of those classifications. What are the judgments that are behind some of the classification? So this is where this debate becomes interesting. And so the thing is that often we like to see things in black and white and linear, that duplicity, good, bad, and so on. So we can start with normal and disorder. It start in one side, we've got normal, the other side, we've got disorder. When you think about it, the whole kind of psychiatry is based on the fact that there is a normal, a norm, and disordered, something that's outside of that norm, so it must be disordered. Another way is talking of neurotypical or neurodiverse. It seems like a nicer way. Some are neurotypical, some are neurodiverse, but then we're still separating people, having that norm and having those people who are outside of the norm. We can talk of strength or deficits or even challenges. It's a nicer way to call about it. And we can talk about both, but which one do we put forward? It's always good to say, yeah, I'm really strength-based, but in all my IEP and everything, it's all around the deficit and the challenges. And the challenges, let's not forget that they're often challenges for us. So it's the way we experience something. And also, you would have heard of low functioning, high functioning, especially when we think of around autism. But really, if you think about it, there's not such thing, and it's actually harmful appellation. And often we say that in high functioning, the only thing is that you don't see the deficits and the challenges. They're not as visible. And as someone that we consider as low functioning, it's just that you don't see their strength. So in a way, you have to be really careful. And it's just a natural thing that happens. But unfortunately, we often see those things simply into two things. When we want to think about neurodiversity or diversity, or just how we are and how we work, how each individual works, probably looks a little bit more like this. So we're far from that straight arrow from one side to the other. Things turning around, going back forward, going up, going down, changing in time, coming back, appearing, so we can have things sensory processing and having smell, and we can all identify with things that just we can't stand that smell, and other smell that brings us back to the past and to some memories, or the taste, things that we're really used to, and our brain is used to associating that taste with something good when some other people might think it's really awful. The touch, liking to be touched or not, or being it's the relationship we have with that. Visual, more auditory, vestibular, proprioception, feeling where we are in space, and our movement, and how do we feel this movement. Interoception, the difference we have in the satiety, do we feel still hungry easily, or we want to eat, or how do we react to different temperatures. Anxiety, can be something that keeps coming, that turns around, that have different level at different time, but some are more prompt maybe. And then the more we have this anxiety, we get into depression, more easily for some than others. When coming from the same family, having the same situation, people will have those different reactions to the external stimuli that come to them. We all have like maybe some OCD traits that come like more strongly at times that we're maybe a little bit more stressed or anxious, like stimming, like more seen like in autism, but we all use like those things like clicking the pen or like making them turn. Like we all have things that we like to touch and like continue doing. Social skills. Yes, where are we in our social skills? Like, is it something that we can assume once and for all, or something that we need to work on, or that happens at better time at different times? And of course, depends on communication. What's our like easiness to communicate? Do we come from other countries? Is English our first language or second language? Do we actually use verbal language or not? So all this way of communicating, the confidence, like we all have like different level of confidence depending also on certain situations. That's also going to impact all our social skill, all the rest. Being open to novelty. Do we like novelty? Do we seek novelty, or do we like to stay on like a bit more like in a conservative way, like what we're used to and what we know, the way are things? The energy levels, like having like more like hyperactivity or like different levels, or like more like those kind of low levels, and depending on the time of the day and what do we do about it? Do we use substance to help it? Coffee, anyone addicted to coffee? Focusing and paying attention, like what's our ability and the ability of each one to be really able to pay attention and to be able to focus on something. Or obsession, like to be completely obsessed on something, that it's hard to focus on something else because that's really what we're obsessed about. The need for routines that can be different for each student, for each one of us. Like some of them really need that routine, some others like to go with the flow. Organization and planning, like some people naturally, those like executive function skills, like some people are just natural at organizing, planning, and some others like, oh, no, I can just deal with what I have in front of me. Tomorrow is another day. Control of motor functions, like they're completely different for different people. And like the whole kind of low muscle tones, or like what control do we really have on the movement that we have and the strength that we put into them. The adaptability, are we all as adaptable, going to different countries, different environment, different culture, like somewhere like different than just our routine or even our family. Information processing, do we all process the information the same way? Some people can process so much information and like mathematical terms like so quickly, and others like it's just like it takes a long time to think and you have to make a list in your head. So we all different in the processing. Like are we good at categorizing it in our mind and go somewhere, or it goes kind of in a random place and we find it hard to retrieve it? And then creativity, are we creative? Are those kids creative? Or like, do we have different way of expressing this creativity? Are people really not creative at all? Does that exist? So there's so many ways of seeing that, and that's just a few examples. It's actually a lot more complex. So how can we put people in a box and give them names and say they're like that or like that? And even for us, we realize that when we see all these examples, we're kind of all part there. Like there's not one spectrum, there's like all those different spectrum. So it's like, let's forget that idea of that straight line and that continuum that we have to be like at one place or the other with a low or high. It's way more complex than that. And another way of picturing it is like this way again, like the autism spectrum not being linear, but more like in that circle and having like different variation of like social skills, fixations, like routine, sensory issues, and again, the high functioning and low functioning. Try to avoid those. Like you can read like testimonies of people who've been called low functioning in front of themselves because they were nonverbal, when they were actually processing, understanding all the information, but just didn't have the ability to respond back. So those terms are really harmful. So that's, again, the value we put under the classification. And so that's another kind of image of seeing neurodiversity and inclusion. It's like at the first one, you see exclusion. So it's just people are just excluded from the norm. Second one, it's segregation. It's kind of even worse because not only they're excluded, but they're identified as being the excluded one. And then you have integration. And that's, I think, the really interesting one, because that's often what we do and we think we're doing inclusion. Or like they're in the class and they're doing the things and they have like that differentiated, but they're just integrated, but still identified as being different. And then you have inclusion, where you realize, no, all kids are different. Let's stop saying that a few of them, because they have a labels behind, are more different than others. No, we're all. So how do we find that way of teaching in a way that address all the needs? And of course, there's no easy answer to that, but it's something to take in and reflect and think again about that concept of universal design for learning and what it means and how can I put it in practice. And then, yes, terminology matters. Terminology is important, and around neurodiversity, there are like all this confusion. For example, a classic one is a neurodiverse student. I've got 3 neurodiverse students. Where do you think you're standing there when you say I've got 3 neurodiverse students? You're pretty much in segregation. Trying to integrate them, but does that look like inclusion? Not really. So you can't really use things as one neurodiverse student. You can use things like a neurodiverse classroom. Oh, that looks more like that inclusion. A neurodiverse learning needs. So in a way, think of multiculturality or biodiversity. These are metaphors that are often used like to think and give analogies to neurodiversity. If you have like someone from another country, like Maori or European, and you say, oh, well, that student is really multicultural. Oh, William was really multicultural. No, he's not. All the kids, and if you look at the kids, even from the one that you think are Pakeha New Zealander, actually they do have their other like identities and culture that come from different ways. So there is just the classroom is multicultural. A student is not multicultural. It's the same with neurodiversity. Like the classroom is neurodiverse, not one student. And if you really have the urge to call a student some way, there is kind of an appellation that's called a neurodivergent student. That's the way that you kind of identify one. But even that, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that way of saying. For me, and I've seen it many times, and a lot of people really put it forward, like a lot of advocates of neurodiversity. But in a way, I like it when people call themselves, I am neurodivergent, and I call myself that. But calling others that, it's a different thing. So in a way, if you're like really struggling and you have the, oh, what should I do? What should I call it? Try this one. Let you read it. It's self-explanatory. Sometimes it can be as easy as that. Going back, and you can see like these little cartoons from 1999. So it's like a while ago, like handicapped. This word is not even used anymore. Pretty much. If you go back, like in my country, in Belgium, in French, handicap is still used. It has another meaning behind it, but still it has the meaning, the heaviness that it has. So people are always trying to move away from certain things. And with neurodiversity, the last thing that we would want everyone as a community is that neurodiversity just becomes another word for special education, special needs, or whatever list of names that we have. And so that's why it's nice to incorporate everyone and say, no, the world is neurodiverse. It's not divided on like different kind of people. Yes, it's divided in different kind of individuals, and some like maybe feel a sense of belonging in one place or another, but still it's just different individuals. And so here is a good example of a little bit like going back to the Western medical model. If we're wondering about terminologies, why not use the beautiful terminologies that we have here in New Zealand? Really, when I talk with like friends or colleagues from overseas, like, and they ask me, oh, how do you guys do things, or where you're at with that? I say, well, the beauty we have here is that there is like another worldview that's so much more inclusive by nature that we can use here. And so let's use it more. And some example, like, let's see like a little bit the context. You have disability, Western medical model, like it's not in the norm, disabled, disability. Or you have Faikaha, to have strength or to be differently abled. My marking, 0. Sorry for the medical model, 1. Teo Maori. ASD, or good old ASD that we're so used to like using all the time. Autism spectrum disorder. Or this beautiful one that you all know from, I'm sure, Takiwatanga, in his or her own time and space. So that's so much more inclusive. Don't you like just perceive the person differently, when you hear it that way, instead of autism spectrum disorder. Okay, disorder, I've got to fix it, I've got to fix that child. And that child grows up feeling I've got to be fixed. So again, 0, 1. ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactive disorder. Again, the beautiful disorder, and you know, like all those terms come from the DSM-5. And again, psychiatry, their bread and butter is to differentiate, is that they need a norm and kind of a sickness, an illness, a disorder. That's what their bread and butter. So in a way, they're going to put those names, but then again, what's the value then that we put on those names and on the people that either identify or that we've put the label on them? And instead of ADHD, you can have auroretini. Attention goes to many things. Again, like you see the person differently. Say, oh yeah. So straight away, 0, 1. And finally, now we're getting there, neurodiversity, or kanoro aroro, the many faces of the mind. There I'll give them an even. We're kind of slowly catching up to it. But again, it's more than the terminologies. It's how we use them. It's like in which context, what the value we put behind, and the worldview that we have. So it's all about the worldview. And then to finish, like, again, that's simple and very self-explanatory. But talking quickly around assessment, because it's often the moment where we put those names on people, where we have those judgments and those values on people. When sometimes it's just our way of assessing that's not the right way. That's the wrong or the disorder, but not the person in front of us. So that's what we should be thinking when we assess people. And it's also what happens in diagnosis. That's a big assessment. Or like educational assessment. Let's always keep in mind that maybe it might be that it's our way to assess the knowledge or the skills. That's not the right way and not the answer that we're getting back. So that's something to always keep in mind. And that I think that's in a way, the takeaway and the practicality of what it is, because that's also when a student is going to feel sense of confidence of I can do it, or no, oh no, I failed again, but I get it, but it's just, I don't seem to be able to like get it out the way that it's expected. So we're at the other end of that. And so that whole thing of, in a way, what we want is our students to like, not just to have the knowledge that we've taught them, but to actually like feel confident, to grow, to bloom, to feel like good in the world, to feel like a positive association with education and learning. And so that's part of our responsibility. And so to finish, I'll finish with my favorite picture of my little Esteban and my favorite Fakatoki that goes with it. Fangaya katipu kapua wai. Nurture it and it will grow, then blossom. So let's be aware we have all those little flowers. Let's just help those flowers blossom and give beauty to this garden of life. And the garden is more beautiful if the flowers are different. It's not about which side, which color. It's more about, are they growing to the most, to their potential? That's what we want to happen. So let's be that gardener of life. Thank you, everyone.